Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for being flexible and changing our schedule to accommodate Madeline. Welcome, Madeline. We are so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you guys so much for being so flexible about this.
Not a lot we can do about the weather, right?
Yeah, definitely was an interesting situation for sure.
No doubt, no doubt. So we read The Keeper of the Hidden Books, set in Poland, and loved it. That was so interesting.
Thank
Our Let me think, what was our Sheila, what was our companion book this time? It was, oh, it just went out of my head. But it was,
Mrs. Moore goes missing,
thank you. It was a mystery, cozy-ish mystery. Thank you, Sheila. I knew
right?
you'd know. um, and it was set several years prior to this takeover. And so it was interesting to have read that one and some of the history and then
Yeah,
yours because it's all kind of a continuous thing for Poland,
right.
it seems
Yeah,
like.
and I've never read that book, so that's really cool.
Yeah, it was interesting. The author, it's a duo, it's a pseudonym for two men, and her name's Marila, and I couldn't even pretend to pronounce the last name, but has a bunch of W's and K's and Z's.
A lot of consonants,
But
hard
yeah,
consonants.
right, yeah. And but it was really interesting because it was you got a piece of life in Poland during hard times, all of
Right.
that, the whole stratification. And so it was just really interesting reading that one before this one. It
Yeah.
it gave a bit of a foundation, I felt like. So that
Yeah,
was that was kind of interesting. So
that is cool.
your books, your historical fiction books versus romance, they tend to be kind of a love story to books.
Yes.
And they are all set around the World War II time frame. They are all very book centric, strong women protagonists, or women protagonists at least, but it seems like strong women protagonists.
Right.
Was that intentional or did it just kind of happen?
Well, the books about books thing kind of just happened. Like when I decided to write The Last Bookshop in London, I was really inspired to write that particular one because, and that was the first historical fiction, which
Yeah.
is why I'm referencing that one. I'd read about this bombing during the Blitz that had taken out Paternoster Row, which was basically England's, it was London's kind of like a whole book district.
Yeah.
During that, like over 5 million books were destroyed. And that's what made me think like, oh, well, the book community and how sad. And I thought, well, what if there was like this one bookstore that kind of held everything together? And so that was kind of my inspiration. And so I wanted to make that particular book sort of an homage to the love of books. And it's interesting because when I wrote that, I actually didn't put any I didn't put any like bad words. I didn't put any really gratuitous, violent scenes there.
Yeah.
And I also kept everything very closed door. I mean, it was pretty much like a kiss, and that's the only thing that ever,
Right.
which to be honest, after over 35 books in romance, it was a little bit nice to close the door.
Yeah.
But I will say it was interesting because I had such an overwhelming number of people who reached out to me and said, "Thank you for writing a historical book with no sex and no violence and no bad words." Like,
Wow.
wow, I guess this is sort of a market that people were,
That's
and
so
then people sort
interesting.
of had this like expectation of me that like I wouldn't write books like that. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just keep doing it
Don't
because I
read
was
my other
fine.
books, but
Yeah, like that's why I say, like, if people ever ask, I'm like, if you don't want this in your books, don't read my romance because it has all the things.
it has all the things.
But basically, so I kind of fell into the whole books about books thing, and I've actually written a couple of romances where the protagonists are either readers or even authors. And I think it's just something that has, reading has been such a huge part of my life.
Mm.
Like I was an army brat, and we moved every 3 to 4 years, and I was really painfully shy, which I'm sure is kind of crazy to think about now, but I am sort of like a closet introvert,
Yeah.
when I was younger, I was very much not a closet introvert. I was very shy. And so my best friends always were the librarians at my school because they would
Yeah.
help find books. And in those books, I would find characters that I could connect
And
with
they
and
could go with
feel
you
not so
when you
alone.
traveled. Yeah.
Yeah,
Moved.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that really gave me such a strong foundation for my love of reading. And people loved the whole like books about books so much. I was like,
Hmm.
well, there's tons of stories out there. So I kind of started to find them. Although I will say that my next book is that's coming out in September called The Secret Book Society is actually a Victorian era. So I am
Oh, okay.
reading a little bit. And then my next book after that, that I'm actually leaving for England in 2 weeks to go and research, is set in the 1600s about the witch trials, just having followed the bubonic
Ah,
plague. And it's actually going to be my first dual timeline with a contemporary timeline.
that'll be cool.
So yeah, so it's not going to be book centric, and I'm honestly a little bit anxious about it. I hope it's not going
Sure.
to like make people upset, but I mean,
Got to go
yeah,
where the story goes. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So how do you get your ideas for the books?
It depends. Like certain things kind of spark certain inspiration. A lot of times it's usually reading an article. Like when I read this article for the last bookshop in London that I mentioned, for the Librarian Spy, which is about it was this article that was talking about librarians that were sent from America into neutral countries to gather literary intel that they could send back to America for assessment. And
Oh.
I happened to have done research for another book that I wish I could say like my publisher loves every single book and thinks it's gold and wants to publish it, but that's not the case. And so they had rejected an idea, but I feel like there's no such thing as wasted learning. And
Right.
I happened to find this woman who actually existed with the French resistance group in Lyon, France, and she operated a printing press to create clandestine newspapers. And I thought, oh, how cool if I had both of them sort of in here. And actually, when I went to France and I went to the Resistance Museum there, I actually got to see the printing press that Leanne Gozniak had used to create all of those clandestine papers, which
That's
was
cool.
so
Yeah.
cool.
I remember
And
reading that one. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's
it was really cool.
really
And it's funny
cool.
because I was there it's so long at the museum that the security guards started following me around. That's how you know you've been in a museum for way too long.
Exactly.
But in
That's
my
so
defense,
funny.
none of the plaques were in English, so it took a lot longer and I had to get everything I could
No
from there.
doubt. Yeah. Whew.
Yeah. So yeah, so I mean, and then and then with the Book Lovers Library, that one's about a widowed mother who has to send her daughter away during the when all the kids were being evacuated in England. And it takes place in this adorable little place that was based off of a real lending library called the Book Lovers Library. And when I found the research for that, they had so many quirky customers that would come in. I thought, oh, these people would make such great characters, and I think they did.
That's so
So
fun.
so yeah, so
Yeah.
like you never really know where inspiration really does
Mhm.
kind of strike. It's just, you know how it is. You get that seed of an idea,
Yeah.
it
You get
blossoms
an
into this
idea. And
full vine. Yeah,
yeah, it's funny to sometimes see like the beginning idea and the finished book and
right,
how different they might look from
right,
beginning to end.
exactly.
So yeah. So this one, you went on your research trip with your mother.
Yes, yeah. And this one was actually inspired by these amazing journals that I found by Warsaw's public librarians. And they were actually detailing out all of their efforts to save books and to like have these secret libraries. And I feel like it's so easy to think like this day and age, well, save books. I mean, you can always just reprint them. But first of all, in America, I think that it's safe to say that American books get translated into international languages so much more than the opposite happens.
Right.
Also we have like all these soft copies of our books. But in Poland, if all of the books were being destroyed, and you would think, okay, well, they're all being destroyed. Who's to say that this one book will ever have another copy of it left? This could be the last
Yeah.
copy of this book in Poland. And when it's gone forever.
That's
And so
crazy.
that's why people were willing to risk their lives to save these books. And it's really actually preserving heritage when you think about it. And which is also why they were obviously wanting to get rid of so many of it as
Hmm.
well. But
Yeah.
and then operating the secret libraries because I mean people still they needed so much hope. And there was a lot of characters who I incorporated into that that I read about in my research. Like how the older kids weren't able to go to school because they had to watch the younger kids, and they would go to the library and they would learn how to read books that way.
Yeah,
So a lot of it really did come from that. I think I forgot your original question because I
that's okay.
detoured.
That's okay.
Oh,
It
my
was
mom.
you went,
Yes.
yeah, you went with your mom.
Yeah. So my mom has been a huge supporter of my writing from the very, very beginning.
I love that.
And she always is the last person to read my books before they go to print. She's got these eagle eyes, so she can always,
I
because
love that.
a million people could read your book and like typos will always still
Oh,
slip through.
absolutely.
Yeah. In fact, it's funny. I actually just did a chat. The chat that I did in Philadelphia was with new authors, telling them like how to prep their social media and what they could do for release day. And one of my tips was know that there's going to be a typo in your book and it's okay and it's not going to ruin your career.
Right.
Because it's just going to happen, unfortunately. I think it happens to like literally everyone.
Yeah.
So she's always the last person to read it. And so, when I've been doing my research trips, I've been bringing people with me. So like my daughter came with me to Lyon, France, my oldest. My husband came with me to Portugal when I was researching Portugal for
Right.
the Librarian Spy. And I asked my mom, I said, I told her, I said, I think my next one's going to be in Warsaw, Poland. And she said, dibs. So she called dibs. So she got to come with me
Now,
and we were there.
some of your back, some of your heritage is Polish, is that right?
Yeah, so my dad's family is actually Polish. So my mom's English. So she actually
Okay,
has
so
no
she's
claim
not
technically to
Polish, but
Poland, but
okay.
she is the one that makes keyfleas every Christmas, which is our Polish tradition.
There you
And
go.
that in and of itself earns her that trip to Poland because it is a labor of love. It is a 2-day process, and every year
Woo!
we're like, oh, it's time to make keyfleas. And don't tell anyone that I said this, but she actually doesn't even like them. So
Oh no,
but we did
a
discover that
true
there's
labor of love.
it's truly an act of love. But we did discover that there's tons of other Polish meals that we absolutely love, and we ate the heck out of it while we were there.
Oh, that's
But
awesome.
but yeah, so she came with me for those 2 weeks, and I mean, man, she was such a trooper the whole time. We went because I like to try to hire private tour guides.
Yeah,
And so we ended up having a private tour guide who took us on 5 different tours that lasted between 8 and 16 hours. And
yeah,
the whole entire time, I usually walk about 25,000 steps a day when I go to
I
these
believe
places.
it.
I want to walk and get the lay of the land.
Yeah,
And we went to they had the Uprising Museum. We went there 3 times. Actually, wait, 4 times. One time was because it was free that day and I didn't know it, but apparently everybody else in Warsaw did. And then I was like, okay, I actually can't concentrate here. But it
get the
was
lay of the
really,
land, and that's about
yes,
it. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And it was one of those things where it was so cool to learn a lot of this stuff with my mom because I knew that later on she would read the book and she would see how I applied everything that we learned
Yeah,
together into the story. And so
yeah.
that's why I dedicated the book to her also
I
because
love that. Yeah.
thank you. She was such a special part of that book.
It says, "For Mama, every scene in The Keeper of Hidden Books makes me recall something I learned in Poland with you at my side." I thought that was so sweet.
Aw, thank you.
Really, really
I will
nice.
say I did feel bad that this was a book with like a tumultuous sort of mother-daughter relationship.
But
But
it changed, and
I did.
yeah, and it was it was so interesting, Matka,
Yeah.
seeing her transformation
Thank you.
and the things that were important to her and then became less important, and the other things that became more important, and how I think she was stronger than we knew even from the
Right.
beginning, even though she didn't show it, as even though
Right.
we
Right.
didn't know it. And
Yes, no, and I really wanted to actually use her as sort of because there were a lot of Christians, a lot of Catholics who started off really not caring. They actually were almost sort of anti-Semitic. And toward the end of the war, they were like, oh my gosh, like how could we have just stood by and let this happen? We didn't know it was this bad. They really had the blinders on. And then once the
yeah,
blinders came off, they were like, oh my gosh, this is
oh my
horrible.
gosh,
How
yeah,
could this have happened? And so I really kind of wanted to use Matka to really demonstrate that and
yeah,
wanted to do it with somebody who was really close with Sophia so that you could really understand sort of that mindset as she went through that process. And so having that intimate relationship really gave me
Yeah.
the opportunity to delve really deep into the psyche of that transformation.
I like that.
Thank
Nicole
you.
said, even in the background, you got to learn, you got to know Matka, which, yeah, because
Thank you.
that was really good. Um, so when you went to Poland, did you already have the story kind of outlined and kind of know the direction you were going?
So yes and no. So the original inspiration for this particular book was I was reading another book and they were talking about people reading in the ghetto. They were talking about how they had the books that they would put into a suitcase and carry around and
Right.
share with one another. And then also Centos, the library that was operated for orphans or that was operating under the auspices of an orphanage care center by Basha. And so I was really inspired by that. And so I had this whole idea and really like when I go on my research trips, it is very much like almost like a tree trunk of a plot where you have like the beginning, the middle, the end, but that's about it. And I'm
Yeah.
kind of learning all the branches and leaves and everything. And so I came home from that trip and I put together the plot. And initially this book actually was two characters. It was going to be from Zophia's perspective and also from Yanina's perspective.
Okay.
And then I felt like I was constantly looking for this one elusive piece of information. And so I was kind of writing the book and plugging along. And then and I have a really bad habit too of writing or doing too much research. So I had research for like 10 months and this book was due in 2 months. And so I was like, okay, like hurriedly writing
And to
it, you
get
know.
writing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, as we do on deadline. And so I had this book halfway written, and that is when I found the research where I found those journal entries, those diary entries
Oh,
from the Warsaw's public librarians. And I thought, stop the presses. Like, this is
yeah.
exactly what I was looking for. So I stopped and I started doing the research and I realized, oh my gosh, there's everything here. Because with research, you know, sometimes you're like, you're poking around for the vein and you can't find it and you just keep poking and then you hit a vein and it's like it unearths like this
Yeah.
whole wealth of information. And that's exactly how it went in this case.
Wow.
And I realized, you know, already this book was so cumbersome. It was just way too big because it was, you know, I wanted to include from the very beginning of the attack on Poland all the way through May 1945, which you guys know is when the library reopened. And that was a very important part to include. So
Yeah.
already it felt like I was trying to shove lightning into a jar. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to have to completely throw everything away and restart this book. And so I called my friend and I told her that. And at this point, the book is due in like 3 weeks. And I was like, I think I can do it. And she was like, oh, honey. He's like, no, 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 you're going to definitely need an extension, which we know is like a bad word in our industry, no
Right.
extensions. And so I ended up reaching out to my publisher and I was like, I'm going to have to rewrite this book. I'm so sorry. I was like, can I just have another month? And they ended up giving me another month. And it ended up working out. It was very serendipitous because my original release date was going to be the 4th of July. And
Yeah.
you know, you don't have to be an author to know that the 4th of July is a horrible day to
I would
release
think so.
because there's
Yeah.
all this noise. We're all getting 1,000 emails about sales and everything. So because of the fact that I turned this in a month later, this book ended up coming out on August 1st, which, as you know, is the Warsaw Uprising anniversary. And in Poland or in Warsaw, even today, on August 1st at 5 p.m. at W hour, the entire city still goes completely quiet to honor the men and women who fought for everyone who fought to bring Warsaw back. And in
Wow.
fact, apparently, when Taylor Swift did her concert there on August 1st at 5 p.m., that whole stadium went silent. Isn't that
Wow.
amazing? Yeah,
That's give me
I
goosebumps.
know. And so the fact that my book came out that day, it was just like
That's
such an honor.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
was pretty
It was
perfect. I
really
like that.
special.
Yeah. That's very cool.
Mhm.
And so you obviously met a lot of characters along in your research and learned a lot of stories. Was there any that was more impactful than others or that stood out?
No, I mean, I will say that it was really hard to research this book. There was a lot of really dark, depraved
Yeah.
things read that I won't tell anybody about. I won't even tell my husband. Like, I wish I had never read them and had those
Right.
things my brain because every now and then they creep up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then
Yeah.
I can't get it out
Yeah.
and I can't sleep. So it was really, really hard to research this book. But, I really do feel like it is sort of all of these characters are sort of amalgamations of people who I read about, including even the neighbor from across the way who
Yeah.
had said that she wanted them to turn in Yanina. Otherwise, she was going to. It's just, I really tried hard to kind of pull everything together. I will say it's really interesting because I do read my reviews and people will say things like, there was one person who had mentioned how the people could see the faces of the pilots when they were coming down and strafing the streets. And they're like, they could even see their eye color. And they said, oh, and they were saying you could see them laughing through the cockpit. That's ridiculous. This whole book is just ridiculous. Except that that came from like 50 different firsthand accounts.
Wow.
And so like it's like the truth is stranger than fiction. Of course, we never engage. So
Right,
I'm just
right.
everyone's got their opinion, but like it's the truth.
Hmm.
So it's there really is so much truth in this book that really did happen. And if it seems like it's made up, it probably was true.
Yeah.
So
It's scary, like you said, that we as humans don't necessarily always learn from history.
right,
And
exactly.
because we don't believe, oh, that couldn't be true.
Right. Well, and
We
what's so ironic about that too is they thought the Holocaust wasn't true.
Mhm.
And back then, because when they were hearing about the concentration camps, oh, that can't possibly be true. It's too
Yeah,
horrific.
it's too horrific. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's scary what people can do.
Yeah.
So one of my questions had been, are Zofia or Yanina based on anyone specific, or just kind of a, like you said,
It's
an
kind of like a
amalgamation?
blend of a bunch of
Okay.
characters together. I will
Yeah.
say it's funny because, like I said, my mom, always reads my books, and after she finished reading it, she always gives me her very honest opinion, and it's always like, remember, be gentle because I can't change too much. The book's coming out.
Right, right, yeah.
So, but she said. She's like, it's interesting because Sophia is so much different than all of your other characters. Like your other characters are usually so really sweet and kind, and this one is fiery. And I said,
She
well, yeah,
is.
she's fiery. She's Polish. And really that stems from, they had 100 and over 120 years that they were under Russian occupation. They had just received their freedom when their independence when after the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1918 after World War One.
So
And they had
we're
just
looking at,
celebrated.
like 20 years worth of
Yeah,
freedom, and that's it.
because they had just
Yeah.
celebrated 20 years when the Nazis rolled in, and then they were
Jeez.
under Soviet control until 1990. So like, she was born in this very, very small, very exclusive pocket of freedom. And her entire life, all of those kids had grown up being told about the men and women who had fought and died for them because Polish women fought also.
Oh, I would
I
imagine.
mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't uncommon for women to go out there and fight.
Wow.
And they were a very passionate and fierce people who fought for this freedom. And she was so lucky to be born into it. And so she was so loath to let that go. And that's actually kind of what inspired the idea for the book club, because I thought, if there's this rebellious teenager who likes to read, because of course she likes to read, um, and she hears kind of not Hitler knocking on the door of Poland, like what would she do? And I thought, you know what, I bet she would want to read all the books that he's banning. And
Yeah.
as you all know, there's no better way to read books than with friends, and that is what kind of came up with the idea for the Bandit Book Club.
Now, I don't know exactly when you were writing this, but here in Florida, we've had some go rounds with banned books, and it's always curious which books they choose to ban.
Right?
Um, was that in your head at all, or was it
It actually
after?
wasn't.
Okay.
No, like I had total blinders on when I was writing this book. And I was going through my galleys. I had to do like a last galley read through, and I was totally procrastinating and looking up the news. And that's when I saw it. And I was seeing like this new list of banned books. And I thought, wow, this book is really, really timely and incredibly relevant,
Hmm.
which is pretty sad that it is. This
Yeah.
book, almost 100 years earlier, is now suddenly relevant for a very similar reason. But
Hmm.
it's honestly my hope that because of the fact that I didn't actually write this book with an agenda, that it comes across as being more genuine, which is exactly what it is. And I hope that people who previously maybe didn't care about banned books might read this book and
Well, and
have
to see the
little
progression,
seed
it's
kind of
it's not
planted.
just about banned books. I mean,
Yes. And
you know, you
how
can
it makes
see in
people,
their story
yes.
where it went from there. That was just the beginning. So,
Yes. And
yeah.
how it turns into persecution because,
Hmm.
it's so easy to persecute people who you don't know.
Hmm.
And books are the best way to see into somebody's soul.
Yeah.
And taking that away and limiting LGBTQ and minority author books is one of the first ways to make them sort of
Hmm.
unknown
Right.
and easy to persecute. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. So curious. So, how did you choose the books for the banned book club?
Oh man, talk about a labor of love. That was so much work. I was like, oh, it's going to be great. And then I was like,
It'll be
okay, it has to
great.
be these certain criteria. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done to myself? So I, first of all, it had to be banned. That unfortunately was the easiest part because there
Right.
were so many. And then it had to make sure, I wanted to make sure that it had been translated into Polish, which that took a little bit of
Okay.
digging. And then I had to have read it. And, it's funny because I feel like War and Peace is always used as the benchmark for like this long book, but Les Miserables is even longer. But it was really a beautiful book. I've actually never read it. I've seen the play. I watched, the movie with Uma Thurman. But I've never actually read the book, and it really was exquisitely beautiful. So
Okay.
I like to say if you have like 3 weeks of your life, which apparently one woman corrected me and said like 2 months, I
Yeah.
highly recommend
You're a
reading
fast
Les
reader.
Miserables. Yeah, it could be like a year-long read that you just kind of read between other stuff, but it was
Right.
really, really great. To be honest with you, I listened to it. I totally cheated because I was also
Listening
doing so
isn't
much
cheating.
research.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I had to have read the book. And then I also wanted that book, especially if it was going to be a book that they talked about in their book club. I wanted it to showcase something in their lives, like to pull back a veil, so to speak, on something that they would never have considered from that perspective before. I wanted it to show how these books that were being banned had a certain level of experience and education that helped people grow and help their minds open.
Yeah.
And that was really, really important. And one of the ones for me that I felt was the most profound was All Quiet on the Western Front.
We had a
Because
good discussion
sometimes,
about that one. Yeah.
yeah, like how many times have we read a book that everybody recommends and you're like, oh no, man, this book's like whatever. And then you pick it up after a certain experience or just like a length of time, and all of a sudden it's like boom, and it just hits you right in the chest.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Books that
that
you've read
relevance,
as a child or young adult and then read again later in life.
yes,
Penny was talking about that. And
yeah.
um, it's interesting. I mean, just, our views on the world change as we
Oh,
grow
absolutely.
older because we live.
Yeah.
And
It's funny. Yeah. Like I read The Giving Tree, like everyone gets a giving tree. And I was sitting there reading it to my kids when they were little. And I was like, oh, it's a cute little book, whatever. And then I picked it up as a mom of teenagers and I was like, oh my God, it's motherhood. Tears. So even like a children's book really can have like that kind of profound impact
right,
once you've had a certain
absolutely.
experience. Yeah.
Penny said that your book made me want to go and read All Quiet on the Western Front. And the book that impacted her in this similar way was 1984.
Oh yeah, I actually have that on my TBR. I was just getting ready to, yeah. So I'm excited to read that one.
Yeah, yeah. So curious stuff. So, of the books that you read for the band book club, was there one that kind of stood out to you as, because I know, let me think here, you had to kind of order them in a
Right.
certain way.
Right. Yeah,
And
it took
so,
a lot of work.
yeah, because you wanted the books to match Zofia.
Right. And her
And
growth.
so, yeah. And so, did you like find the books first and match them to the story, or think, ooh, I need this type of experience? Let me find a book, or how did that
Um,
go for you?
I had a list of books that I wanted to read, and I started to just kind of read through them. And then I saw how the various ways that they could play into that particular area. Like with Les Miserables, when I was talking about the candlesticks and how it sort of correlated to the earrings that her mother had given
Yeah.
to Veronica. That was the after I read that, I was like, oh, this is a really great way to demonstrate some of Matka's change as well and
Right.
let her kind of see that change a little bit. And even, at the very beginning, with reading Metamorphosis, it kind of it showed Sophia a little bit like that the mother is always working in the background. Nobody ever took Gregor for really seriously, and his efforts, all the work that he did. And then he turned into this giant bug and everybody just kind of shunned him. And it made her think about all the things that her mother was doing for her, that she was basically shunning her mother. And so, there really were so many different ways that I could really tie it into the
Pull those
plot.
in.
But
Yeah.
it was after reading the book, I felt like I had to know its heartbeat before I could figure out where it fit in the pulse.
Yeah. And did you know like the thread of the story? Was that piece already
Yeah,
written
I had that piece of
mostly?
the story then, yeah.
Okay.
And because when I came up with the idea for the book club, man, I can't even remember what part of the process it was, but once I came up with the idea for the book club, that was before I had to rewrite
Needed to
it,
be
so it already
woven.
was, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Nice.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I liked one of my comments on my sheet was I liked the way that the books mirrored Zophia's worldview, her life,
Yeah.
her experiences, and um, gives us a new appreciation for not only the books but her and her growth. And
Yeah,
I
thank
thought that
you.
was, I thought that was nice.
Hmm.
Um, Germany attacked the whole Polish Jewish culture. Their goal was to destroy everything that was Polish. Um, did they do that in every country that they invaded?
No, Poland was exceptional.
Yeah,
They really did not. They saw Poles as being just slightly above Jews, and like when they took France, for example, they worked along with France. They would carry women's groceries for them. They would hold the doors open for women. They handled everybody very much with kid gloves. When they came into Poland, their idea for Poland was that they wanted to kill off 85% of the population and use the remaining 15% as slave labor. They didn't care who they killed, which is why the
wow.
executions were so violent, even
Yeah, and
just right from the
so kind of
onset.
random. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. But they really thought very low of the Slavic countries. So yeah, they didn't think highly of Poles at all. And so even like when you look at the food rations that were given, like if you look at a chart of them, the bottom two are Jews and Poles. Like Poles got a little bit more than Jews, but honestly not very much.
yeah,
So yeah. And that's the thing that I really wanted to demonstrate with the story is that and it was such a delicate line to walk because I didn't want to say like, oh my gosh, like the Poles had it so bad, and people were like, but the Jews, and I'm like, yes, like,
right, right.
so like I really wanted to illustrate that God, yes, like the Jews had it so much worse than anybody else, and also like the Romanians and the Gypsies and a lot of those, they all had it so much worse, but also compared to the rest of Europe the
Right.
Poles had it really bad.
Well,
And
they
I
were
really wanted to
invaded
demonstrate
first,
that.
right?
They were what?
Invaded first.
Technically, Czechoslovakia was overtaken
Okay.
first. So the way that that kind of worked out was Germany rolled into Czechoslovakia and was like, "This is ours." And everyone in the world was kind of like, what?" And Hitler was like, "Well, it used to be ours, so we're just taking it over." And everybody was just kind of like, um, I mean, is it worth a battle? And they're like, okay. And so they just kind of like let it go.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it wasn't like a hostile takeover. It was just kind of like, this is ours. There was like no fighting or anything. They just rolled in and they claimed it as theirs
Wow.
again.
Right.
And so then with Poland, and even people in Germany were like, oh yeah, like it's totally ours. Like it's fine for us to just take it. So then with Poland, there was this whole sort of like story that they made up about how Polish people fired first at this post office, and that's what started the Germans firing. And it was this big offense because the Germans were on their soil and they should never have been attacked, and that's why they had permission to attack Poland.
Wow.
Um, and so it was a line really kind of made up for the German people to believe, but the rest of the world was kind of like,
What?
I mean, first they took Czechoslovakia and now they're doing
Seeing a
this. Like it
pattern
feels a
here.
little
Yeah.
fishy. Yeah. And it did take a couple days before France and England ended up joining in to help. But even America really sat back on their heels. I mean, just in World War II in general, they sat back on
Yeah.
their heels for a
Well,
while and
until
just
we were
until
involved,
Pearl
we didn't
Harbor. Yeah.
mess with it. Yeah.
Until we were slighted, and then of course we were in it.
Right.
But yeah, and even the people who said that they were going to help, they really didn't help. I mean, they said
Right.
they were going to be there, and everybody kept waiting for them to show up, and it just never happened. And it's interesting because when I went to do research for this trip, oh my gosh, my brain is like suddenly the place that Putin is attacking. Why is my brain
Oh,
blanking on
Ukraine.
Ukraine? Thank you. I was thinking Yugoslavia. No, it is not Yugoslavia, Ukraine. So Ukraine had just recently been attacked because we went in, I think it was May was when we had our trip.
Oh,
And so like before we left, we made sure that we got like antibiotics from our doctor in case we needed them. We weren't taking up anything from the
right,
hospital.
right.
We made sure to book our own private transportation so we weren't taking any public transportation in case people needed it. We even brought like money to help donate and everything as well. And actually, when we got there, it was amazing because so much of the people who were coming over, so many of the refugees were actually readily absorbed into Poland. And you really
Wow.
didn't see a lot of anything because of it, aside from
Wow.
a couple of people who were sort of collecting donations for it. And it was especially interesting because Ukraine, see, I almost did it again, Yugoslavia, Ukraine did not get their independence with the Treaty of Versailles. And so people from Ukraine were actually kind of salty about that during World War II. And they were some of the people who worked in concentration camps and the Warsaw Ghetto to keep people contained.
Oh,
And there was this huge massacre that existed on the border between Poland and Ukraine, with like axes and stuff. It was horrible because of when people that were Ukrainian attacking people who were Polish. And so I was talking to my tour guide and I said, it's just incredible to me that even with this very violent past, you have opened up your arms and just welcomed them into your country. And she said, of course, they needed help. Why would we not? And I feel like that's such a beautiful message to send to the rest of the world,
oh,
like this wrong
absolutely.
has been done to you. It's not blood for blood. It's you need help and we're here for you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's especially neighboring countries. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Nicole said that her daughter's girlfriend has a Polish mother and German father. Her grandfather disappeared and they have never heard of from him. Yikes.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, it's the Polish and German. I'm assuming some Germans stayed in the country and that there's pieces of German heritage or culture there still.
Well, actually, before Poland became Poland, it was actually broken up into different chunks, and each of the
Yeah.
different chunks sort of had their own sort of culture, and then
Okay.
it became one. So so it's actually funny when I say that my dad's family is Polish. So I was in Warsaw researching it. It was reconnecting with my heritage. Technically, my dad's family is from Poznan. So that's like saying I went to North America to research my heritage, but I went to Canada and my family was from America. Just to
Okay.
kind of give some context. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. It is
Very
really
curious.
interesting once I started doing the research. Yeah.
Hmm. The Polish underground.
Mhm.
Was there a lot of information available about how that worked? And
Oh yeah. And this is one of the things that intrigued me from the get-go and one of the things that made me want to write this book. The Polish underground was the most comprehensive and really cohesive of all the underground groups in all of Nazi occupied Europe. And I think the reason for that was because of the fact that they had basically been occupied by Russia for 120 plus years
right.
before then. They had good
They knew
practice.
how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They did it right. And but it's amazing. They had these individual departments that all had these specialty skills. And so that's one of the reasons why the underground school system was as complete as it was.
Yeah.
By the time I think it was by 1944, there were over 1 million underground schools. And when I say underground, I mean more clandestine than like literally underground. But they had over 1 million schools that ranged from elementary school all the way up to graduate programs in college.
Phew.
Yeah,
That's
and they would get
crazy.
these little tickets, and they would get like a handwritten note or like a handwritten ticket, and
Yeah.
then once the
And
war
I
was
owe
over, they
you a
change
diploma.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, and that's exactly how it worked out. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was incredible. But they would only be able to teach classes with like 3 or 4 people. It had a really small group of people, and they had to constantly move. And so,
Right.
and it was really just like how I showed it with Christina, how
Yeah.
she had like all of these things in around her house that she could flip around and then she could make it just be a picture. This was how they had to educate because they had to hide what they were doing. They were only allowed to educate like publicly up to the fourth grade. They
Yeah.
really just wanted children to be able to speak enough English to or enough German to take orders. And I think it was like count up to like 100 or something like that. And that was it. Like they really wanted them
Wow.
uneducated and
Hmm.
malleable so that they could make them into willing slaves.
Right.
Yeah,
Wow. Wow.
I
It's
know.
insane to
Scary.
think about. It is
Yeah.
scary. It is
Yeah.
scary. So you you mentioned this earlier, but you had basically Poland from right before invasion until after.
Right.
And that's a lot of time.
It is. It
How did you
was so
manage
hard
to
to write this
cram
book.
all of that in there?
And that's why I ended up doing the parts.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was trying to write the scenes in the middle of that, and I couldn't force them to work. And one of the things that was so difficult about that is because Yanina was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and Zofia, and really, I mean, the story is about their friendship and about the
yeah.
growth of of their friendship and each other and the people around them as well. But, so those lag parts in between where Yanina was in the ghetto and Zofia was not, it was really hard to show Zofia going around her life without constantly thinking about Yanina. And it was really hard to constantly make her think about Yanina without being obnoxious.
Right,
Like as I
right,
was writing, I was like, oh, and she misses Yanina. Oh, and she still misses Yanina. And she's thinking about what Yanina.
right.
And I'm like, this is kind of annoying. And if it's annoying me, I can only imagine it's going to annoy the reader. And so I thought, you know what? What if we just do parts? And I'm only showing the parts where really the women are together. And that changed it. And I feel
Okay.
like it kept from having a lot of those extraneous parts that really didn't need to be seen. And it let me kind of catch up once the next part started.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
also
that
it kept the book at least, only around 100,000 words instead of being
yeah.
like 120,000 words. So there's
Right.
that as well.
That's yeah, I can imagine. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Huh. So what was the hardest scene to write in the book?
Oh man, that's a good question. Um, I think I mean, the scenes in the Warsaw Ghetto were really hard to write,
Yeah.
just because how heartbreaking that whole situation was. And this is one of the things too, where when I ended up switching it from writing Yanina's perspective, I was kind of glad because her side of the story was just so incredibly hopeless.
Yeah.
And that's hard to write. It's like writing a black hole. But
Yeah.
like when all those kids who were at Sentos, like I would say 99.9% of them ended up murdered in a concentration camp. And it's really, really hard to think about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there definitely were some really difficult scenes. And even, like even with writing the Warsaw Uprising, that was so heartbreaking. I mean, these were kids that were out there in their party clothes, expecting to like, throw a grenade at a bunch of Germans and then get to celebrate their victory when
Right.
Russia or when the Soviets swooped in. And like they just completely got annihilated. I mean, they were just completely mowed over. And just even knowing sort of being prescient to that and knowing that this was going to be happening was just like really heartbreaking. Yeah.
It was interesting at the very beginning of the book, they they're even with their history, they still didn't think it was going to be what it was.
Right. Yeah.
And even having been through it all, like get to the Warsaw Uprising, they still didn't think it was going to be what
Yeah.
it was. And wow,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I mean, and think about it too, because they were born in a free country. So like can you imagine Putin in Jacksonville, Florida?
no,
I mean, can you imagine
Yeah.
him like, or like in Orlando, like just like rolling through and taking it over? And if
Yeah.
it was taken over, wouldn't you think, well, God, surely someone's going to help us and we'll take it back. And that's really how they thought about it. Because it was just one of those situations where, I mean, Warsaw was a city of enlightenment. They were a
Yeah.
city of scholars. They were a city that it was kind of like New York City or something. And it's like, would somebody ever take over New York? Hell no, they wouldn't, Of course they wouldn't. It's New York.
Yeah.
And that was very much their thought process. They were shocked when they got to the point that they were. And just as a result, it was so much more heartbreaking when they saw the soldiers walking through the streets. Yeah.
Yeah. They that made me think about, I just had a fleeting thought come through and it's gone. Okay.
Oh.
I got to catch them quick when they come through. So you said that you're working on, let's see, you've got book, the Secret Book Society coming out next.
Yes.
And so that is set in London.
Victorian London. Yes.
Okay. And
Yeah, it's
Victorian is a very specific period, right?
right. Yes.
And so
Yeah,
when
this is
is,
in 1895. So it's like toward the end of the Victorian era.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so give
So
us a little blurb on the book.
yeah, so this one is about a widowed countess who's very young. She's been widowed 3 times, and she discovers, and if yes, of course, there's quite a bit of gossip going on about that. And she discovers that women are having their reading materials restricted because men didn't like women reading back then because it took them away from being mothers and wives, and it made them contrary to their words because they had opinions. And so
Heaven forbid.
heaven forbid. So she invites these women over for tea and sort of under the auspices of tea. And she lets them read these books. And they start to talk about the books, but they also kind of start to talk about their own personal lives. And they all kind of realize they're not so perfect. And this was one of those things where it's very much like a women building up other women. There is like everything that I love about the Victorian era. I have like hat pin fighting. I have like a poison garden. There's a seance. It's like all this stuff, and there might possibly be a murder. I don't know. And I even have a secret diary where people, because Lady Duxbury, who runs everything, is very enigmatic, and there's all of a sudden they find her secret diary that we get to slowly have revealed throughout the book. So
Wow.
as September 2025, you are cordially invited to the Secret Book Society.
Lovely. That sounds fun.
Thank you.
And then, so the next research trip is also to England. Is that right?
Yes, yes. This one's to Bury St. Edmunds, which is where Matthew Hopkins was doing his witch trials. And there's
Okay.
one that was set in 1645 that I'm going to be researching. And that happened like about 8 years after the bubonic plague. So I'm going to be incorporating elements of that into my book as well, because I've always been fascinated by that particular
Hmm.
time period and the bubonic plague and everything. I mean, really, the 1300s bubonic plague is like what I really, really like was so cool to learn about. It's probably horrible to say that, but 1300s is a little bit hard to go that deep into. A lot of
Yeah.
like to go that far into history. But yeah.
And Nicole wants to know, and who's going to join you on this trip?
Oh, my husband is.
Oh,
Yeah. So
fun.
my mom's coming and she's going to watch my remaining daughter home. My oldest is in college,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
my husband and I are going to go to England.
Fun. Fun. That'll
Yes.
be a good time.
Yeah, we're
Awesome.
looking forward to it.
Very good. So, do you have ideas? Like, I'm sure you have a million ideas on potential story threads. Um, are there any that it's like, ooh, like your 1300s bubonic plague? Are there any that are kind of tugging that you're just waiting for their timing?
Honestly, I actually because I was just in New Orleans and I went a couple days earlier because I really want to write a book about the casket girls. And these casket girls were women who were sent over from France into New Orleans. And they were basically they arrived and they were supposed to be for men to marry, kind of like mail order bride kind of things.
Okay.
And but these women were actually the ones who sort of spawned the whole rumor of vampires. they thought they were the vampires who came in. And I really want to find their actual story, but it's not nearly as easy as I was thinking to at least start finding some information. It's really
Okay.
hard to find, which now makes me a dog with a bone. And I really, really, really want to
That'll
find
be interesting to hear where that goes or if it goes.
if it goes. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if I can't find information, the problem is that there have been a lot of fires and everything in New Orleans. And also these were women that most people wouldn't write about anyways. And so
Yeah.
trying to find information it might not even be possible. So
Yeah.
keep your fingers crossed because I think
Hmm.
it could be a really cool book.
Interesting. I read something recently that a lot of the witch trials, and I don't know if this is kind of what you're looking at, that the women in particular who survived the plague, or I think it was the plague that they were talking about, had a certain DNA structure.
Yes. Well, not necessarily. I don't know about their DNA structure, but I will say that if you're one of your ancestors survived the bubonic plague, you as a descendant are now resistant to HIV/AIDS.
Wow.
Yeah,
And it
it's
was the
interesting.
women who survived, and it was because of whatever um, genetically that they were the ones that were targeted as witches because they
Um,
survived.
well, I'm sure that is part of it. In fact, that's like one of my kind of plot points that I have in mind. But a lot of times they were being blamed for it. A lot of these women who were tried as witches and some men as well, they were just people who were kind of like outcasts of society.
Mm-hmm.
They were either a lot of them unfortunately were older, like, and it kind of goes into this tie-in where like this perception in history where when women can no longer bear children, like what's the point of them? And
Right.
it's this very prejudiced perspective of women that I want
Mm-hmm.
to incorporate as well. And so you have a lot of older women, you have a lot of women who are beggars, you have like single moms and that kind of thing, like women who are like basically like social pariahs. But then you also have women who are incredibly educated because gosh, educated women are scary and they didn't
They
understand
are.
it, and we should just kill them.
Yeah.
So so women who are in unusual situations, which my protagonist, Sybil, in this particular case, not only is she an educated woman, but she also owns a manor outright that her husband had specifically left for her in his will. And so she is a land-owning woman who is highly educated and
Oof.
very scary.
Talk about dangerous. Yeah.
I know.
Uh-huh. Yeah, educated people in general, but educated women are, I think, still something that people
Scares men.
question. Yeah,
Yes.
Penny is
And we are a force to be reckoned with.
amen to that. Penny was a shining light ahead of her time, and she was a physicist. Okay,
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
worked with NASA,
You
and
scared
yeah.
all those boys.
Yep.
I love it.
Good stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I like that. And I love the idea of the book clubs. I think you, whether they're book clubs or just gatherings, or it seems like you incorporate that piece in your stories a lot. And I
Yeah,
like that because in our group here, we're talking about that this month. It's so nice to get together and hear people's thoughts on something because we do all come from different places, different
right.
countries, and hearing different perspectives because people have different lives, different stories. Oh, it all brings a really interesting threads together, and I love that.
Yeah.
So,
No, I agree. It absolutely does. And I think that that's one of the great things about art in any form, and writing very much is still an art form, even if it's not, like a visual art, but we all
right.
look at it different ways based off of who we are inside. And that's really what makes it such a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have to say that readers are the most intelligent and empathetic people and with the most open minds. And there's so many wonderful things that can come from readers gathering together.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's when I'm able to go to reader events, author events where readers and authors and books are all together, it always makes me feel so energized and
Yes.
inspired when I leave those events. And yeah, I love that. So wow, thank you for joining us. Our hour flew past.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And again, thank you guys for being so flexible
No
and
problem.
doing
This
it
worked
today.
out.
I'm glad that we were able to still do this. So,
Same. Yeah, appreciate
yeah.
your time and
Oh, my
making
pleasure.
it
And
work
it's
for
always
us.
so great to see you. And it was so
You
nice to
too.
meet everyone as well. So,
Yeah, thank you. And we look forward to the Secret Book Society coming in September. So,
thank you. Well, you ladies,
yeah,
fabulous rest of your day. Thank you
you
so
too.
much.
Thanks, Madeline.
Bye, Becky.
Bye.